Underneath Scotland's capital city of Edinburgh, a hidden world lies in darkness. A world of lions' dens. There was an actual lion here? In this pit?
In this pit.
Seedy vaults.
I'm standing in a den of thieves and drunkards, huh?
And paved-over, plague-ridden streets.
This looks like you've got an underground city.
This modern metropolis is literally supported by over 10 centuries of its dark past.
Oh, that's the full level of the city chambers up there.
From secret Masonic meeting places and illegal whiskey distilleries to rumored underground sex parties and massive dungeons, and even a possible resting spot for the Holy Grail. Edinburgh's Underworld is a secretive city of its own. We're peeling back the layers of time to uncover the cities of the Underworld, Scotland's Sin City. Located in the heart of the Scottish Hills, Scotland's capital city of Edinburgh has a history that stretches through the ages. From its secret bunkers to its seedy past. There's an underworld here that can rival any place in the world. I'm Eric Geller. I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland, a city whose past tells two very different stories. There was the enlightened and educated capital that flourished up above, while a world full of the poor and plague-ridden lived simultaneously down below. 1,000 years of Scottish secrets are buried beneath these streets, and they're about to be revealed. It all began over 300 million years ago, when a glacier eroded this extinct volcano to create a nearly 450-foot high plateau with sheer cliffs along each side. This terrain may have made this city a nearly impregnable fortress, but it also made it a tough place to build. There's limited space and lack of flat foundations. To make matters worse, constant attacks from outsiders made it nearly impossible to live outside the city walls. The fortifying wall built to protect the Scots from attack seriously limited building space, so residents had to get creative. The rich built up and constructed the first high-rise apartments in the world in the late 16th century, and the poor went down, creating their own mini-city beneath the streets. And these cities are all still there. You just have to know how to get to them. The Royal Mile is the main thoroughfare of Edinburgh's old town. With the castle at the top and the Royal Palace at the bottom, it's one of the steepest and oldest streets in the city. Now today the mile is bustling with life, but 400 years ago, it was the site of Edinburgh's darkest days. In 1644, the last of several plague epidemics ripped through the city. It was an extremely painful disease, with vomiting, bleeding, and infected boils, and a mortality rate of up to 75%. And I was going to ground zero of the deadly plague epidemic. Chris.
Oh, Eric, good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. I met with archaeologist Chris A. Kelly.
If you follow me through here, we'll have a look around Mary King's Close.
Oh, great, thank you. Chris was going to take me over 300 years back in time into this diseased underworld. Almost 80 feet beneath the Royal Mile sits a street called Mary King's Close. It's just one of dozens of streets buried beneath the modern ones. But instead of being filled in, this street was sealed up and forgotten. Until now.
Here we are, Mary King's Close itself.
This looks like you've got an underground city.
It was a massive underground city, now buried 80 feet beneath the streets. This hidden neighborhood, still lined with apartments, was once 350 feet long. That's more than a football field. Today, almost 200 feet of it still remain. But this underground world wasn't always underground. When the city was constructed nearly 900 years ago, it was built up around one main thoroughfare, the Royal Mile. Off the mile were closes, or narrow alleyways like Mary King's, the one I was about to explore. Closes were lined with high-rise apartments and shops. The alleyways made the hilly terrain and cramped quarters more manageable to maneuver. They extended out from the mile that ran down the volcanic hill, down the steep hills of the growing city. The word close comes from enclosure, and today these passageways are found all over the city, both above and below the ground.
So, is this the idea that this would have been the actual close, as it were?
Indeed it was.
And this would have been open air?
Open air, open to the sky, but not necessarily open to the sun.
300 years ago, I would have been walking down the open-air Mary King's Close. The high-rise apartments along the close could have been up to 14 stories high and would have blocked out most of the sun. But for the poor who were unlucky enough to live at the bottom, lack of sunlight was the least of their problems. For the common folk, there was no sewage system or garbage pickup. Instead, the streets we were walking through became a river of sewage washing up at people's doorsteps.
The only sanitation they had was literally a bucket in the corner. The only way of getting rid of their rubbish was literally to put it in the bucket and then chuck it out. What they used to cry was "Gardez-l'eau," from the French "garder de l'eau," mind out for the water, which of course was not what they were throwing out into the close.
The emergence of the word "loo" came out of this system of waste management.
Now, these people from above, they're just taking their buckets of and everything else, they dump them down here.
Oh, indeed. So if someone shouted "Gardez-l'eau," you'd have to dive for the wall or a door.
Now, let me guess that if you live down here, this would not be the best place to live.
Oh, no, but especially if the rain came washing all the filth down, it might flow into your house.
350 years ago, this street would have been a flowing river of waste. With waste washing up knee-deep into the houses, disease spread like wildfire. What made it worse was that the people who lived down here hadn't discovered how the disease was spread.
They thought that the plague was caused by invisible bad smells called miasmas, or they believed it was down to witches and the influence of the devil and ghosts and spirits. They didn't realize that it was the filth they were living in that was causing all the problems.
This secret labyrinth of alleyways and rooms was hit hard by the plague. In an effort to contain the epidemic, city officials put Mary King's Close on lockdown. If you were infected, you were quarantined inside your home. That meant it wasn't long before every member of your family was a dead man walking. Hundreds died in these apartments, and the bodies were kept indoors until the plague cleaner came down these very streets to cart them away. Some say the plague is the reason this entire neighborhood is now underground, that the city bricked over the closes, literally burying the plague victims alive. But recent studies show covering Mary King's Close had nothing to do with the plague. It went back to the city's ever-present need for more space.
And my God, look, it looks like, what, 30 feet above us right now is that floor level of what building?
Oh, that's the floor level of the city chambers up there.
The city chambers is a massive structure that was sitting right above us. Today it covers Mary King's and several other concealed buildings and alleyways. Covering the city of the poor was one of the most drastic changes of street level in history. In the late 17th century, as the small city began to grow, they started to run out of space. But instead of building outside the city walls, they simply built up. 3 centuries ago, the people of Edinburgh actually changed the way their city was shaped, using the mile as its backbone. They literally raised the level of the steep hillsides to run parallel to it. This massive facelift used the existing structures to hold up the weight of the new streets and buildings. In turn, the closes and their tenements became the vaults or basements below the new city streets. 2.5 centuries later, the walls of the basement still hold up the 6-story building up above, but not without reinforcements.
So what is this right here?
Now this is a saviour arch. When they put the vault here in the 18th century to support the Royal Exchange, that meant there was pressure coming from different angles, and they were probably worried, the architects that is, that could be cracks or even collapse. And this thing, of course, was intended to take the weight and spread it.
This subterranean neighborhood turned modern-day foundation was a feat of engineering, an ingenious way to make the most of the limited space the city had to work with. At the same time, it buried a piece of plague-ridden past, creating a time capsule of darker days. 80 feet beneath the streets. Up next, disease-ridden slums are just the beginning.
This is one of the places where the whiskey was distilled illicitly.
I'm standing in a den of thieves and drunkards, huh?
And later, the prisoners held in these dungeons were a long way from home.
Americans might have been hanging out in this area.
Could be in this
French
corner.
probably had the nice hammocks there. You know how the
Yeah.
French are.
Rose Street in Edinburgh was not named after the flower. It was named for the activity practiced there. To pluck a rose meant to pick up a prostitute.
Edinburgh has seen tough times. Bloody wars, fierce fires, deadly epidemics. But each battle has only made the city stronger. Its population boomed, forcing Edinburgh to expand and rebuild. With the horrors of the plague behind it, the city was ready for a facelift. This facelift came in the late 1700s when Edinburgh first began to build past the city walls. The threat of attack was over, and it was time for the city to grow. 5 bridges sprung up around the old town, allowing Edinburgh to stretch in all directions. But these bridges weren't built over water. They covered land. That's because travel over the hilly terrain beyond Castle Hill was too steep and dangerous to cross. So engineers provided the connections, and people moved freely between the old and new town. But there's one bridge that did much more than link Old Town with New Town, the South Bridge. And its unusual construction actually created another world.
Des!
Hello, Eric.
Des, thank
to
you
see
for
you.
meeting with me.
Des Brogan is among the few who know the hidden history of the bridge.
See this bridge here? Right?
Yeah?
Lovely, lovely big bridge. This is the only one of 19 arches that you can actually see. The rest of them are what we call the vaults.
Des was one of the first to enter the lost Blair Street vaults. Vaults that had been forgotten and sealed up for almost 70 years.
Let's go and see them.
In fact, its entrance is so camouflaged by the 21st century that we had to walk through a modern-day office building to get to it.
Here you are in one of the covered vaulted chambers.
And this keeps going. I can see it right now. It keeps going. This is like a maze in here, isn't it?
That's right. What they did, you see, they built the South Bridge, and this bridge was across a valley, and then on the outside of the bridge, they built houses. And that's why you can't see the bridge, except for that one arch where the road runs through. So what you have just done there just now is walk down a flight of stairs, through the old houses, right under the bridge itself. And that is where we are, right under the bridge.
So the office building we had walked through was once an old home. But how did these vaults get underneath the bridge? It all started when space on the South Bridge began to sell at a premium. Businesses built shops on top of the bridge to make the most of the foot traffic. Soon, tenement houses went up alongside the bridges, covering all of the 19 arches, except the one I had just seen. To maximize space, floors and ceilings were built beneath the blocked-in arches, creating dark, vaulted chambers. I was 50 feet beneath the busy South Bridge, and had stepped 200 years back in time. This vast labyrinth spanned over 1,000 feet, making the bridge above as long as 3 football fields. This whole area would have been filled with taverns, cobblers, dressmakers, and glassblowers. But not all of these subterranean businesses were on the up and up. Many believe whiskey was invented in Scotland, and it's always been a deep-seated part of the culture, keeping folks warm in the winter and even curing common ailments like smallpox. But in the early 1700s, a hefty government tax made it nearly impossible to get. That didn't stop the Scots. They took their distilleries underground. In the 1790s, there were only 8 licensed distilleries in the entire country, but there were over 400 illegal ones, just like the one I was standing in, beneath South Street Bridge. These vaults were the perfect place for distillers to make their booze, away from the prying eyes and lofty taxes up above.
Now this is one of our vaulted chambers with something of a history to it. This is one of the places where the whiskey was distilled illicitly. And of course you can see why this would be an ideal place. It's far away from the public, very dark, there are narrow points of entry to it, it's very easily guarded.
It was a battle between the tax collectors and the illicit bootleggers, much of it plotted out underground. An elaborate network of smugglers was constantly on the lookout for taxmen. these clandestine groups came up with ingenious ways of skirting the law, like transporting whiskey in broad daylight inside a coffin. But the hardest part came before the whiskey was even made. Raw materials like grain, yeast, and coal for boiling were bulky and not easy to sneak in past the public above. But the criminals in this vault had that problem all figured out.
It's simply through a hole in the street. By that, you could remove the protective covering up in the street and dump your coal, heavy materials like coal down here, and that then is used to boil up your mash for the distilling of the whiskey.
So that's their illicit coal hole.
Yes, indeed, that's what it is.
Illegal whiskey was only just the beginning. The engineering masterpiece that was the South Bridge began to leak. During construction, the budget was tight, and it was never waterproofed. So legitimate businesses moved out, and Edinburgh's poor moved in. The vaults became Edinburgh's slums. Evidence suggests that brothels and pubs opened up in the damp, abandoned vaults, creating an underground city of homeless, hookers, and convicts. It was so dangerous that no law-abiding citizen, not even the police, would dare set foot near the vaults. But some may have been forced down here. These very vaults are rumored to be the old stomping grounds of the murderous duo Burke and Hare, better known as the Body Snatchers. When William Burke and William Hare were here, the city was growing up above, and the medical profession was flourishing just beyond Southbridge. The best and brightest came here to study medicine. But this need for knowledge created an interesting problem. By law, medical students could dissect the bodies of executed criminals. But with most of Edinburgh's criminals hiding out underground untouched, there was a need for fresh corpses. So entrepreneurs Burke and Hare got crafty. They went on a murdering spree, killing nameless travelers or prostitutes, whose deaths wouldn't cause much concern. They traded in the corpses for cash. Some say, before they made the deal, the cadavers were stored right here, underneath Southbridge. The cool temperatures would have kept the bodies fresh, and its proximity to the university made it less likely they'd be caught in transit. Eventually, the damp vaults were leaking so much, they became uninhabitable and weren't even fit for storing cadavers. In the early 1900s, they were completely abandoned and filled with rubble. Then, 12 years ago, the vaults were cleaned up, and Des and other underground experts were allowed in. The time capsule they found answered many questions about Edinburgh's underground past.
A little glass pistol. Now, this very well could have been filled with something. You could have put a cork in there and put a brandy or a whiskey or something like that.
Could well have been. Could also have been stolen, because of course many of the people who lived in these rooms were very poor, and they would make their living from theft.
I'm standing in a den of thieves and drunkards, huh? So now what's above our head right now?
One more level of arches, and then you've got the road. And in fact, you can actually hear the traffic.
Those people who are driving or walking on that street, they have no idea this is down here.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is another world.
It began as an engineering marvel, meant to bridge old and new. But instead, the construction of Southbridge created a lively and lawless underground inside its subterranean arches. It was a world far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. And both then and now, it's much closer than you think. Up next, how did this city's most indestructible fortress get underground?
All right, let's try not to bite it down here.
And later, the treasures of the Knights Templar are still missing. Could these bizarre symbols be clues to their whereabouts?
What it does resemble is a Masonic compass.
It sure does. It sure does.
The burnt ashes of a dove's dung was one of the most popular cures for baldness in 17th century Edinburgh.
Edinburgh Castle dominates the city skyline. The castle dates back to the 12th century, but the extinct volcano it rests on is millions of years old. Mother Nature created the ideal castle fortress here with steep cliffs to keep enemies out and plenty of underground to keep them in. Each year, over 1 million people visit Edinburgh Castle, the former home of Scotland's most famous royalty. But few know of the world that sits underneath this nearly 1,000-year-old fortress. And I had special access down.
You must be Charlie.
I am that, Eric. Welcome to the castle.
Thank you, Charlie.
I met with senior steward Charlie Hutton, who was going to show me down.
What the issue with a hard hat?
Hard hat. Oh, this is a hard hat. Baseball style. Set that on there. How do I look?
You look grand.
Edinburgh Castle has been damaged and rebuilt many times in this city's turbulent history. But a stronghold has existed here since the 7th century. The structure has all the fittings of a super fortress. It was the home of the mighty Scots, considered barbarians to the rest of Europe. Through the years, the Scots earned their fair share of enemies. So it should come as no surprise that there are dungeons in the castle's bowels. Lots of them. But the dungeons Charlie was taking me to first weren't the barbaric medieval dungeons I was imagining. And the prisoners these walls once held weren't the ones you'd expect. These subterranean rooms were first built in the late 1800s as a bakehouse to feed the many soldiers living on site. But when Britain found itself embroiled in the Battle of the American Revolution, this bakery took on a whole new use: to hold captured American sailors. This looks like a dungeon down here, Charlie.
This is a dungeon.
This looks like a dungeon, huh? So there would have been captured sailors.
Yes.
And they would have been the prisoners in this.
Yes.
And they would have been sleeping in these cots.
Yep.
And they would have just gone on for rows and rows.
Yeah, they would go on for rows and rows.
And this room would have held how many people?
40 people.
40 people.
Yeah.
So your Americans might have been hanging out in this area.
Could be in this
French
corner.
probably had the nice
Yeah.
hammocks there. You know how the
Yeah.
French are. 200 years ago, I would have been standing inside of a 2-level dungeon. Along with 2 solitary cells, there were 8 large cells, each approximately 10 feet wide and 10 feet tall, and carved out of the lava rock 600 years ago by hand. At the height of the American Revolution, space was tight, and upwards of 1,000 sailors would have been packed in these very rooms. Mutiny was always a concern. But what were these Americans doing here in the first place? The Americans began the revolution without a navy, but they quickly transformed their merchant ships into war vessels, and ironically, chose a Scottish-born captain as one of their naval leaders. His name was John Paul Jones, and today this Scotsman is considered the father of the American Navy. He took the revolution right to the shores of Britain by planning to attack seaside towns and vessels. But if one of his hundreds of wartime ships was captured in the process, the captain and crew were immediately jailed. Those Americans captured off the coast of Edinburgh were brought to these very rooms with no chance of escape. If you even were able to get through here, this is all those steep cliffs that go down over 100 feet.
Yeah, you had a long climb.
And it would be a heck of a climb. It would be a deadly fall, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you certainly will.
We were over 400 feet above sea level in a medieval castle built atop the volcanic rock. And like any fortress worth its name, it holds many carved out cells and hidden chambers under the castle rock. Next stop, an underworld fit for a king. Today, the east section of the castle is a drum-shaped building called Half Moon Battery. But in 1547, this entrance tower was the first line of defense in case of attack. Beneath this battery sits an even older defense structure, and this one is the textbook version of what a fortified medieval castle would have looked like. It has a lion pit and even escape routes carved into the lava rock. All right, let's try not to bite it down here. This is great down here. Look at this place. This place was just a small part of what was once a super tower. The 700-year-old tower was a well-fortified royal stronghold, the size of a modern 10-story building. Amazing when you consider that it was built by hand. It was built to be a castle within a castle. The idea was, if the main castle fell into enemy hands, the king and his court would retreat into the immensely fortified secondary building. These rooms were big enough to hold not only the king, but also his family and royal court. There were 10-foot thick stone walls soaring 100 feet high to ensure their safety. But this fortress was actually carved into the lava rock 60 feet below the ground level, an added safety measure to protect the leader of the Scots. This is a great room. Look at this place.
This was the king's bedroom.
This was the king's bedroom?
King's bedroom.
Since the room is beneath almost 10 stories, these arched ceilings help to distribute the weight of the heavy castle up above. But what if an enemy did breach the castle's defenses and find the king's hideout? They were in for a deadly surprise.
Just below you here, you have a pit on a lion's den.
There was an actual lion here?
There's a lion here.
In this pit?
In this pit.
This last line of defense was incredibly simple, but deadly. As the king withdrew into his chambers, his guards would have removed the wooden planks outside his door. The invading soldiers were then left with the 6-foot jump. If they didn't make it, they fell almost 10 feet into the lion's den. If things got so bad that the lion was unleashed, we can be sure that the king would have been long gone. A secret escape route ensured that. It was carved into the hillside beneath the castle, where a tunnel led to a door that opened up outside the castle walls. But if David's Tower was such a protective fortress, how did it get buried 30 feet within the Half Moon Battery? It all started in the 16th century, when David's Tower suffered heavy bombardment from the English. There was a 5-year siege on the tower. In the end, the top of the tower collapsed, crumbling through the inside and leaving these subterranean rooms. 200 years later, the Half Moon Battery was built in its place, burying what was left of this medieval fortress. But over 60 years ago, and nearly 30 years after David's Tower was rediscovered, these subterranean rooms would be used for protection once again. It was the year 1939, and war broke out all over Europe. Bombing was a serious threat, and the Scots needed a safe place to hide their most valuable possession, the crown jewels. What better place than deep inside a 14th century toilet fit for a king?
This is the king's toilet.
This is it, huh? This is the king's throne? Oh man, so the royal ass is right here, huh? I wouldn't say this is fit for a king, but it's not too bad for 14th century, huh?
That's right. In 1939, when the war broke out, the crown jewels were moved from the crown room, brought in here and they were buried.
Did they pick this area for a reason?
Well, the reason would be, would you like to go and dig in a toilet?
Well, for crown jewels, I might think about it, you know?
A nearly 1,000-year-old subterranean dungeon carved into a nearly 300-million-year-old volcanic rock. I was at one of the highest points in the city, but down these steep slopes of Castle Hill were many more underground cities just waiting to be explored. Up next, a super bunker is buried beneath this train station.
It's the biggest kept secret in the railway station. People don't know what this is about.
And later, a subterranean site so mysterious. Could it be the resting spot for the Holy Grail?
There's nothing else like this known at all. It's completely unique.
Cockfighting, the most popular sport in Scotland in the 18th century, was banned from the streets of Edinburgh after huge crowds of spectators brought traffic to a halt.
The history of Edinburgh's underground occasionally relies upon a great deal of rumor and speculation. But the key to unlocking the truth about the underworld might just lie in the darkness of a long-forgotten tunnel. Hidden between a playground and a basketball court, the remains of the city's once thriving railroad can be found. But the Scotland Street Tunnel was much more than a railway line from the mid-1800s. It actually played a key role as a super bunker, saving hundreds of lives during World War II.
Duncan?
Eric.
Hi, Duncan. Nice to meet you.
And Duncan Fraser was getting me down there.
Got something interesting to show me?
Okay, let's go.
I was heading into a lost tunnel dating back to 1847. A tunnel whose mere existence helped to create the Edinburgh we see today. Over 100 years ago, space was tight in the city. But planners knew they needed a way to get construction materials and equipment in and out of the town center. So they built Scotland Street Tunnel, an ingenious idea that allowed freight trains to travel beneath the streets, going from the city center to Scotland's bustling ports. But new railway lines prompted Scotland Street to shut down after only 20 years of train service. The tracks were ripped out, leaving an empty cavity. The city above quickly forgot about the world down below, until nearly 100 years later, when Hitler attacked. And the gaping hole beneath the houses was transformed into a super bunker.
There's all sorts of scattered debris around here. Looks like some poles of some sort.
Yeah, this was occupied during the Second World War, and it was used for a number of things, including storage of important documents, and it was used as an air raid shelter as well.
In the 1940s, World War II was raging through Europe. This empty tunnel was over a half-mile long, the size of nearly 10 football fields, making it the perfect subterranean bunker to protect citizens from Nazi bombs. 60 years ago, thousands of terrified locals filled these very walls whenever an air raid siren sounded overhead. The world they left behind is nothing short of a subterranean city.
Duncan, what is this? Is this something for the railroad?
No, it certainly isn't. This is a toilet block.
A toilet block?
It's a toilet block, yeah.
You mind if I use this? I need a few moments here. This is like the kind of urinal you'd see at a sports stadium or something like that.
Don't bang doors.
Don't bang doors. Look at this. All right, I shouldn't be banging on it, should I? And there's another bank. Okay, so let's see if
this would mean the ladies.
This would be the ladies, right? And of course, the ladies' toilet's in a little better shape here.
Yeah, they probably looked after them better.
Look at that. Oh, see, now this is fine. Fine accommodations for the lady folk, huh? Luxury. And compared to the men's stalls, it is, isn't it?
But people weren't the only things protected in this underground super bunker. Evidence of filing cabinets, electrical wires to bring in light, and storage spaces were all along the tunnel.
Yes, during the war, the civil servants also found there was a need for storage, and they're very worried about losing valuable papers. So down here they actually had storage rooms with filing cabinets in it to store these papers. What a wonderful idea.
Some government workers even relocated down here, forming a little community. That's because the risk of a bomb dropping on this neighborhood was very real.
The German forces were coming over and trying to hit the docks, which are very close to here. So people were very vulnerable living here.
There were no reported injuries inside this makeshift bunker, and after the war, it was nearly forgotten. Until, oddly enough, someone realized the lack of light was perfect for growing mushrooms.
So 60s and 70s, we would have seen a field of mushrooms. We'd be walking on mushrooms right now.
It would have been, all down the floor of the tunnel here, yes.
But Scotland Street and the mushroom farm inside it was closed forever in the early 1970s after a robbery in one of the railroad stations up above.
The bandits used this as the exit route to escape the police. And they ran all the way down here, got out, and got away. And because of that, for the security reasons, they shut the tunnel. What a shame.
Yeah. For all those mushroom lovers out there, what a shame, huh?
Sealed off and forgotten, this site became a secret very few knew about. It was so secret that when a shopping center was built in 1985, a pile was driven right through the roof.
So tell me about this. Why is this here?
This is here because they damaged the tunnel. The only time it was damaged when they drove the piles down through it, not realizing that the tunnel was here.
The tunnel was repaired, and mall construction continued up top. Today, shoppers have no idea we're down here. Neither do the commuters, as they rush to catch their trains.
Look, I got a train to catch. Could we go in that way?
Yeah, let's go and see. Come on,
let's have a look.
Let me lead on. And you can hear the whistles blowing. Now watch out, there's some electrical cables on the ground here.
All right, try not to get shot. I see light.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh man, do I see light. This is the light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the train station right out here. This is the platform. When people here are getting off the trains and they take a peek at this, do they have any idea what this is?
I think it's the biggest kept secret in the railway station. People don't know what this is about.
It's a forgotten tunnel, first built for freight trains, that later became a super bunker that saved lives. This engineering marvel has withstood the test of time. And 10 feet beneath the ground, it's just one more example of Edinburgh's saturated subterranean. Up next, from Masonic symbols to secret sex parties, it's an age-old mystery buried underground. Edinburgh's long history is full of vice and corruption. From the subterranean streets of Mary King's Close, where thousands of plague victims lived and died underground, to the vaults of the South Bridge, where thieves and illegal whiskey distillers hid from the public eye. I'd seen the dark and seedy underside of the city. But there's one forgotten spot in the sleepy suburb of Edinburgh that has a past no other site can rival. A rumored past where Freemasons met in secret, where an ultra-rich sex club conducted sexual rituals, and where the Knights Templar may have even hidden the Holy Grail. The site is called Gilmerton Cove, and it lies underneath the small mining town of Watson, just 4 miles from Edinburgh's city centre. Though the mysterious cove's history stretches back hundreds of years, very little is actually known about it. But I found the one person who could let me in.
Hi, great to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Great.
Just 10 feet beneath the streets, and directly beneath a local bookie joint, was a carved-out warren of rooms dating back centuries.
Come down here. If you want to put a hard hat on, some of the doors and ceilings are quite low, so just a little bang in your head.
All right.
Mel Johnson is an expert on Gilmerton Cove, and has heard every story and legend surrounding this secret suburban spot. Watson is a mining town, so holes beneath the streets are nothing special here. But when this site was officially excavated in 2002, experts were stunned. There were 7 subterranean rooms that up until 225 years ago were still in use.
This is Gilmerton Cove.
This is really neat. This is really impressive down here. I mean, even I've just seen this little bit here. It's great down here.
It's quite bizarre, isn't it? It's not what you expect when you come down. It really is a very odd place.
But what made Gilmerton Cove even stranger was how it was constructed.
The whole cove has been excavated out of the sandstone bedrock. By using the bedrock, they've created these rooms and passages and spaces. All the benches and all the tables, all the doorways, everything has been carved away.
So that's what this is. This is a sitting space. Now,
it is.
Can I sit on this, or this one looks like it's going to break?
No, that's fine.
All right. Well, I'll have a seat on the bench. My limestone bench that's carved out. This is great.
The official version of the story is that in 1719, the cove was the home of a local blacksmith named George Patterson. He decided to build an underground dwelling where he could work and live with his family. It supposedly took Patterson 5 years to carve out his home. But some say the cove is too elaborate to be the work of one man. It's built around a main corridor that stretches for 40 feet. Carved entirely out of natural sandstone, it has 2 entrances and 6 main rooms. Each room is decorated with built-in, carved-out natural furniture. The cove covers over 1,000 square feet and is 10 feet beneath street level. After Patterson's death, the cove fell out of use. And that's when his homey warren of rooms became a den of vice. Away from prying eyes, the cove was an ideal spot for all sorts of illicit activities. There are rumors that it was used for illegal whiskey distilling and smuggling of goods. And there are even stories that these rooms were once an underground brothel and pub. But even more salacious, the cove is rumored to be a meeting place for the notorious Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club was a gentleman's club popular in the 18th century. The club met in secret and is rumored to have held everything from orgies to satanic meetings in their subterranean hideaways. Their motto was, "Do what you will," and Gilmerton Cove might have provided the perfect amount of privacy to do just that.
There are a lot of rumours about what this place was used for. Theories are that it was some sort of illegal drinking den, that it was, ritual or occult type activities, that the Covenanters hid down here.
But the Covenanters were around a century before the blacksmith Patterson, who was originally thought to have carved out these rooms by hand. That meant the history of these rooms could actually date back even further than originally thought, to an exceptionally bloody time in Scotland's history. The period was called the Killing Times, and began in 1638, when the King of England tried to crack down on the Church of Scotland. The Scots rose up against the king and signed their version of the Constitution, called the National Covenant, to confirm their opposition to the king. But few realized their signature could bring death. Covenanters lost their homes. They were harassed and tortured, driven to exile, sold into slavery, and many thousands were killed. As the king's army scoured Scotland looking for Covenanters, many retreated underground, in secret.
What is this?
Well, it's always been referred to on the early plans as the Punch Bowl.
The Punch Bowl?
Yes. And it's mysterious. It doesn't make any sense. They've gone to some effort to define it.
Sure have.
It doesn't look like much, but this bowl, carved out in the middle of the table, resembles a baptismal bowl. Did the Covenanters risk death and hold mass in this very room while the king's army searched for them just 10 feet above? Could they have carved out these rooms and not the local blacksmith? In 1897, the first attempt was made to find these answers. An extensive survey was launched in hopes of unlocking the mystery of these rooms. They discovered its history may have been older than expected. The sharp chisel marks on the walls pointed to a much older and cruder way of carving. Experts guess the cove dates back nearly 400 years. This finding linked the cove to the time of the Covenanters, but experts uncovered other clues, leaving more questions than answers. The cove is littered with graffiti from throughout the centuries, but only one symbol was repeated in numerous places.
One of the interesting symbols on this table is this one. What it does resemble is a Masonic compass.
It sure does. It sure does. See the compass right there.
The compass is one of the most common symbols in Freemasonry, a secret brotherhood whose origins are shrouded in secrecy. But before elaborate lodges sprouted up around the world, could the first Freemasons have met underground in this subterranean cove? In 2002, excavations here revealed another clue that may link the Masons to this site, a secret doorway.
There's a bit of a mystery still in this room. There's some sort of entrance, doorway in here, but this blocking, this was all in place when we came down here to do the excavation. We were told by the structural engineers not to move that because the street is just up there.
Literally right there.
Yep.
So if you keep digging in here, the street may come down.
Exactly, which is why we weren't allowed to. But we don't know what this doorway leads to.
So it could be just as shallow as that, or it could go all the way underneath the street.
It could go all the way under the street.
This tunnel points in the direction of another local landmark shrouded in mystery. It's Rosslyn Chapel, where, like Gilmerton, Masonic symbolism is carved in its stone. The street might fall down if they dig any further, but if Gilmerton and Rosslyn are connected underground, then Gilmerton could actually be the final resting place of the Holy Grail, brought here by the famous Knights Templar. The Knights Templar was a powerful order of Christian crusaders, disbanded in 1307 when the Pope charged the Grand Master with heresy and burned him at the stake. Many knights fled to Scotland for safety, along with their treasures and wealth. Here they were far from the reaches of the Pope and Inquisition. So what happened to their holy treasures? No one knows for sure, but rumors abound. And one rumor, like this filled-in tunnel, points directly to Rosslyn Chapel. Rosslyn Chapel is just 7 miles outside of Edinburgh and 5 miles away from Gilmerton Cove. Built in 1446, it's literally bursting with symbolism, linking this small chapel to the Freemasons and the ancient order of the Knights Templar. Many believe it was actually built to protect the treasures of the Templar, including the Holy Grail. But could Gilmerton Cove actually be the Grail's final resting place? What better place to hide something that everyone's looking for than a sleepy mining town far away from suspecting eyes? And the key to putting these rumors to rest may just lie beyond this wall of rubble.
We just don't know. It's too unsafe to find out at the moment, unfortunately.
Today, no one can say for sure what Gilmerton was used for. But finding these mysterious clues carved in the walls beneath a bookie joint is sure to make anyone's imagination run wild. And though it's been nearly forgotten, Mel says there are plenty of reasons to keep these stories alive.
Edinburgh's famous for the vaults and the underground city in the centre of the city. There's nothing else like this known at all. It's completely unique, and nobody really knows what its purpose was.
From tales of body snatching to secret societies, from engineering masterpieces holding up the city to crown jewels stored down below, Edinburgh's Underworld has been a multi-purpose place. But down here, it can be hard to distinguish fact from fiction. And the only people who could tell us for sure, those that once roamed these subterranean sites, are long gone, and most have taken their secrets to the grave. That means modern-day residents will just have to keep on digging.